The history goes back to the 1840s. Our matriarch, Anna Friesenhahn, came over with the German migration group through Galveston in 1845. She lost her husband on the trip. She brought several children, including two older sons. She spent time in New Braunfels and ultimately married another fella. They moved out here in 1857 to 1865. So the property you're standing on, we have title back to 1865. We have title back to 1857 across the dry Comal Creek. Here, with the exception of about 20 years when my great uncles, Vitus and Ferdinand, who were part of the third generation of our Friesenhahn group, sold out. They were elderly, and the descendants sold to outsiders. So beginning, that was in the early 60s, beginning in the mid 80s, I had the opportunity to buy some of the land back. And I did, and ultimately I ended up with 110 acres here when coupled with the 90 acres that my Opa Jacob, brother to the two great uncles that owned this property, we end up now with my two brothers and sister and I have around 200 acres here right along, half a mile off the I-35 corridor there between San Antonio and New Braunfels. I started buying the land with the intent of, hey, that'll be neat to have a place. I chose not to spend more and more money on a bigger and bigger house every time I moved. I was fortunate in my moves, home prices were ramping up and I didn't get transferred in a downturn. So instead of doing like my peers, I bought farmland. And then I thought, well, you know, I had the chance to buy near where I grew up, and that gave me a chance for my sons to stay with the grandparents, my Oma and Opa, Roman and Julia, their grandparents, my parents, and enjoy the land here. So I started with the boys growing up, helping me clear the land, keep the two homes in shape, and do all that in lieu of spending every Saturday in the mall with all their Houston area city friends. And then one day I was driving down the road and I said, what am I going to do with that land? You got to do something with it, because Dad taught us to use the land as a farmer and make it better than you found it. And I decided I was going to be a pecan farmer when I grew up. I rejected cattle and corn and row cropping. I hate shoveling maize and dusty row crops. Calves are only born on cold, freezing nights at midnight and have to be helped. So I chose not to do all that, and pecan trees stay in one place, and you blink and you ask a few questions and then you start planting trees, and that's how I evolved into deciding to do a pecan farm. After the fact embellishment, I never really paid a lot of attention to pecans. We grew up with pecans as a crop that came off the trees around all the old home sites. Everybody planted them, and you use that crop for the holidays and to pay your real estate taxes. Is pretty much the rule of thumb. When I thought about pecans and started asking around, I became real intrigued with the differences between that and other types of farming, cattle raising, row cropping, etc. And as I started talking to people, I decided I'm going to do this. This is a pretty good challenge. I think I can do this. So I made the decision to launch the pecan orchard and started establishing it. And about the same time, I had two boys that were a year apart in school with college coming up, 1 year between them. So do you reserve money for college or do you build a pecan farm? I chose the latter. And I just put a wetted thumb in the air and said, you know, this is going to work out somehow. We'll develop enough cash flow. Well, it did. It was questionable at times, but my wife was a conservative German from here as well, and we pulled it off. We put both boys through school with no debt, and we kept the farm going forward and developing it. It wasn't easy. I spent every spare minute that I had working on this, only to have a growing awareness that that wasn't enough, and it was becoming less of enough as time went on and the orchard grew. So ultimately I ended up retiring probably a little early, largely because I'd kind of reached the end of my energy rope of driving back and forth every week at least 200 miles one way. Yeah, to handle the orchard. And always in the back of my mind, I was going to do this right and do farming right, but I couldn't when I was working. So I kind of split the middle and retired a little before age 60. I spent my life doing engineering work for ExxonMobil in what we call the upstream oil and gas. And for everybody, that's the difference between working with the oil wells and production of the oil and gas as compared to working on the refining side, which meant I worked on gas processing plants, helped drill wells, put pipelines in the ground for the oil movement to the refineries. The upshot of all that is doing an irrigation system was a snap. I mean, that's something you did before coffee in the morning, you know, if that was part of your skill set. So irrigation design, drilling my water wells and integrating that into a design of a pretty efficient irrigation system, that was easy stuff. Welding and farm repairs, I've always had a passion for restoring cars, and I still do. I'm working on a 1936 Ford four-door deluxe rust-free car right now, 40,000 mile car, beautiful thing. Taking it all apart and restoring it. But those skills gave me a pretty good feel for repairing things, including gearboxes, hydraulics, and you know, the more complicated stuff that the tractor dealers normally do. So I brought those skills and a high school training on welding, with encouragement from Dad on welding as we grew up, brought those skills to the table. And I can't tell you, you can't emphasize enough how useful those skills are to this kind of work, yeah, no matter what your background was. But the engineering side made the calculations and that kind of thing easy. On the other hand, it gave you the false sense of knowing everything, where you miss some of the things that farmers know by the seat of their pants or by the row of hard knocks. They know instinctively how to do things, where I had to calculate it or think about it from an engineering standpoint, and sometimes you underestimated how difficult it was and how well they knew the task. So that was hard. But most of the basic skills, I was able to translate that from growing up on a farm and combining that with a professional office environment, engineering environment. It worked. And you could guess that I would talk about making sure you have enough funds to get started and that you have land and water. But I won't answer it that way. I've come to the point where my answer is as follows. You got to decide that you have the passion to be a farmer, be a pecan farmer, because it means some special things. First of all, is you take the land and you're obligated to make it better than you found it. And second of all, you've got to be willing to withstand hours and hours of work, getting greasy when you don't want to, being accused of not being at parties and events for the kids. And you try to balance that, but invariably something bad happens on the farm when your kid's birthday party's going on. It's just the way it works. So you got to be willing to commit to all those things and feel that you can get up in the morning, walk through the orchard, and look up and say, this is cool. I like this. If you can't do that, go on cruise ships and play golf.